Book 10, ANASTA. It was the year 2010 according to the Gregorian calendar. On the planet Earth, the first humans were awakening from a 10,000-year sleep. What lay ahead of them was to see what happened to the Earth while they slept, to understand the reasons for it, to engrave a record of what had happened into their memory as an antivirus so that nothing like this would ever happen again. They engraved the many car accidents and wars. They engraved the stench in the air of the cities and the extensive pollution of the water. They engraved the numerous illnesses that had befallen humans' physical bodies while humanity was in this sleep state. They engraved. But for the moment, they were unable to formulate the causes. But they will be able to. Of course they'll be able to. They'll return to the earth, its primordial nature. A small child is walking through a glade in the heart of the vibrant Siberian taiga, smiling. Nothing frightens him. No one attacks him. On the contrary, the beasts are ready to rush to his aid at the first sign of trouble. The small person walks like a royal successor walking through his kingdom. He finds it interesting to observe the lives of the bugs, the squirrels and the birds, to study flower blossoms and see how the blades of grass and the berries taste. He'll get a bit older, and then he'll perfect this beautiful world. And where is your child at this moment in time? What kind of air is he breathing? What kind of water is he drinking? How will he occupy himself when he grows up? But first things first. The beginning. I decided to start this book by reminding the reader of the events that took place in Siberia more than 15 years ago, so as to make the book easier to grasp for people who haven't read the earlier books in the Ringing Cedars of Russia series. I'll try to introduce some additional information about my first meeting with the unusual Siberian hermit Anastasia. Anastasia lives in the heart of the Siberian taiga, in the same spot where her parents and her ancestors once lived. The distance from the spot where she lives to the nearest god-forsaken Siberian village is about 25 to 27 kilometres. There are no roads and not even any paths. You'd have a very difficult time managing a trip like that without a guide. The actual glade where she lives doesn't differ much from all the other taiga glades, except that it looks somewhat cared for, and in the number of flowers. There are no structures in Anastasia's glade, no fire pits, but it's precisely this spot that Anastasia considers her family space. The first time I met Anastasia in 1994, she was 26 years old. The Siberian woman Anastasia is a very beautiful woman, even extraordinarily beautiful. The words extraordinarily beautiful are not an exaggeration. Imagine a young woman, a bit more than 170 centimetres tall, with a good figure, not waif-like, like contemporary models, but genuinely well-built and lithe, as if she were a gymnast. She has regular facial features, grey-blue eyes, and the hair the colour of golden wheat spikes that cascades to her waist. Perhaps you could see a woman anywhere who looks like her on the outside, but I don't think you'd ever come across the other special qualities deep inside her that make the taiga-dwelling Anastasia extraordinarily beautiful. Everything about her external appearance speaks of ideal health. It comes through in the fluidity and lightness of her gestures, in the springy way she walks, as if she were flying. You get the impression that her body contains within it some kind of otherworldly energy, whose abundance warms the surrounding space with invisible rays. Your body warms up slightly when Anastasia looks at you, and by squinting at you with some kind of special gaze, she can heat up your body to such an extent at a distance that your whole body begins to sweat, especially around the feet. Toxins leave the body, and afterwards you feel significantly better. In general, I surmise that Anastasia's knowledge of the properties of the taiga plants and some kind of internal enable her to cure a person of absolutely any illness. At least she cured my ulcer with her gaze in the course of a few minutes. However, she categorically refused to do any subsequent healing. Illness is a serious conversation between God and man, says Anastasia. Through this pain, which is both yours and his at the same time, he's letting you know that you're living in some unacceptable way. Change the way you live, and the pain will pass. The illness will recede. Anastasia has one extraordinary ability. When she's telling a story about something, pictures of the event she's narrating arise in the listener's consciousness or in actual space. And the images she shows are much more picture perfect than any modern television picture. They're three-dimensional, complete with the smells and sounds of the time she's describing. It's quite possible that at one time many people possessed these capabilities. If you bear in mind that in our technocratic time, man hasn't invented anything that wouldn't have existed in nature, then it's possible that something perfectly analogous to our modern television and telephone also existed in early human civilization. Anastasia has shown me pictures from the lives of people of various periods, starting from the very creation of the world. Pretty much all of the events she shows are connected with her ancestors. If you were to characterize Anastasia's capabilities in one phrase, here's what you could say. The Taiga dweller, Anastasia, preserves the experiences and emotions of the members of her extended family, starting with the creation of the very first human, in her genetic memory, and she is able to call them up at will. She can also model pictures from the lives of people in the future. Anastasia's life in the Siberian taiga differs significantly from the lives of people in modern cities. So that you'll be able to understand the conditions in which she lives out her life, I have to say a few words about what the Siberian taiga is. It's Russia's largest expanse of open land, ancient and snow-covered. In European Russia, it extends for 800 kilometers, while in western and eastern Siberia, it stretches out for 2,150 kilometers. As you can see, this is an impressive landmass. Today, the taiga is considered the Earth's lungs, and rightly so. It produces the majority of free oxygen. You have to bear in mind that the taiga zones begin forming even before the onset of the glaciers. So by studying life in today's taiga zone, we can learn about life on the planet Earth before the Ice Age. Remains of a well-preserved baby mammoth, now kept in the Zoological Museum in St. Petersburg, were discovered in the permafrost. It's hard for us to get a good idea of the animal world in taiga zones before the Ice Age. In today's taiga, lynxes, wolverines, chipmunks, sables, squirrels, bears, foxes and wolves are numerous and widespread. The ungulates you'll encounter include noble and northern deer, elk and roe deer. There are numerous rodents, shrews and mice. Among birds, wood grouse, hazel grouse, nutcrackers and crossbills are ubiquitous. During the winter, the great majority of animals settle into anabiosis or hibernation. This state of living organisms has been little studied by scientists and is generating greater and greater interest among those who study outer space. As the plant world is concerned, various types of bushes grow in the taiga: juniper, honeysuckle, and others. You'll find bilberries, cowberries, cranberry and cloudberries, all with mild content. Among grasses suitable for consumption, sourgrass, wintergreen and fir. You'll find majestic trees reaching 40 meters in height: spruce, fir, larch, pine, and a tree with unique qualities, the cedar, which scientists sometimes call cedar pine. I'll say right off that, in my opinion, they really shouldn't call it that at all. But what can you do? Let science focus on the pine they mistakenly call a cedar. I'm going to talk about the incomparable Siberian cedar. Why is it incomparable? Because the cedar gives unique fruits, cedar nuts, and deserves its own separate name. quality of the fruit of the Siberian cedar, these cedar nuts, greatly surpasses that of the nuts of the cedars in other climate zones on the planet. Way back in 1792, the academic Pallas wrote about this in a letter to the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. Cedar wood possesses special photoncidal properties even once it's been cut, so a moth will never take up residence in a closet made of cedar. And the Old Testament's King Solomon, who also seems to have known of cedar's mysterious properties, built a temple out of it, having given away several entire cities of his kingdom in exchange for certain specially chosen cedars. But the priests were unable to perform services in the temple because a cloud formed inside it. 3 Kings 8:11. After having pored over a multitude of sources that talk about the Siberian cedar, I'm inclined to suggest, and not without basis, that the cedar is a representative of the pre-Ice Age plant world, and that it may be an envoy to us from a different, more developed civilization in the biological sense. How was it able to survive the planetary catastrophe and come to life anew in our world? Cedar seeds can survive frost and are able to hold out for an extended period of time, so that they can come up during more favourable climatic conditions and adapt to the new environment. This adaptation continues up to the present day. What is so unique about the fruits of the cedar? Why is it that today we can state with certainty that they are the most ecologically pure and healing food product of our time? The cedar nut kernel contains the entire necessary complex of vitamins. And scientists from the University of Tomsk, who have studied the properties of cedar oil, added it to the diet of people who had served as responders to the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and who were suffering from radiation poisoning. The results of the experiment showed that the test subjects' immunity began to increase. There are no contraindications for the use of cedar oil. Even pregnant women and nursing mothers can use it. There's one other mysterious fact about the cedar nut kernel. During periods when cedars do not bear fruit, the females of certain fur-bearing animals don't allow males to come near them and don't conceive. Still unclear how the cedars let the animals know that they won't bear fruit in a given year. After all, the animals mate in the spring, but cedar fruits ripen only in very late fall, and it's very difficult to tell just by looking at a cedar tree that it's not going to bear fruit. There are a great many other plants in the taiga for the entire taiga animal world to feed on. Similar taiga-dwelling animals in Russia's central zone get along entirely without cedar nuts. So why do females who have fed on cedar nuts consider it impossible to conceive and bear young without this food? It's been noted that the fur of taiga-dwelling animals, particularly those from regions where cedar grows, is of much higher quality than the fur of all other animals. No matter how scientists and specialists fine-tune the diet of the animals they're raising on fur farms, they can't manage to achieve fur of anywhere near the same quality. The fur of the Siberian sable from the regions where cedars grow has always been the highest quality fur in the world. It's well known that the condition of fur-bearing animals' fur reflects the condition of their organism as a whole. So, if their condition improves when they consume cedar nut kernels, then the same should be true for humans, especially pregnant women. Our women might not be getting enough high-quality food products to enable them to bear healthy fetuses, and this situation can't help but degrade society. The fruit of the Siberian cedar disproves scientists' opinion that agriculture is the great achievement of humans, evidence of their development. I think that agriculture came into being because human civilization lost its knowledge of nature and because people's way of life changed. As a result, man began sweating in the fields to get his daily bread. You can draw your own conclusions. Let's imagine that there are 2 fruit-bearing cedar trees growing on a parcel of land where a family of 3 people lives. You can absolutely you can be absolutely certain that the family that owns the parcel of land where the two cedars grow will never go hungry, even in the years with the worst harvests. And it isn't just they won't go hungry, won't live from hand to mouth, they will feed on the best, most refined food there is. One cedar alone is capable of producing, in 1 year, up to a ton of cedar nut that can be used as food once they're shelled. But that's not all, not by any means. You can extract cedar milk from the kernel of the cedar nut, which is not only suitable for human consumption, but which you can also successfully use to feed infants. You can get world-class cedar oil from the kernels, which you can add to salads and other dishes and also use medicinally. After you express the oil from the cedar nut kernels, you're left with an oil cake, which you can use to make excellent baked goods, bread, cookies, pastries and crepes. The cedar also gives us a sap that's recognised by official and folk medicine alike as a medicinal and prophylactic substance. The Siberian cedar doesn't require any care at all by humans. You don't need to fertilise or till around it. You don't even need to plant it. Its seeds are planted in the earth by a little bird called the Eurasian nutcracker. It starts to become clear why it is that our cedar ancestors knew nothing about agriculture. It's just because they knew much, much more. Maybe someone will say, well, the cedar bears fruit only once in 2 years, and if the barren year comes along in the same year as the bad harvest, then how can the cedar remedy the situation? I'll tell you. It's true that cedars bear fruit once every 2 years, sometimes even less frequently, but its unique nuts can last from 9 to 11 years if you don't remove them from the cone. Of course, nothing is quite this simple today in our real life. The cedar has a hard time taking root near cities. It can't tolerate ecologically polluted zones. But there are also encouraging outcomes. Many sources indicate that the cedar responds to human conditions, that it can take in energy from humans, and having increased it, give it back. I had the chance to convince myself of this personally. 7 years ago, 25 Taiga cedar seedlings were sent to me, together with the residents of the 5-story building where my apartment is located. I planted these seedlings in the little wooded area bordering the building. I planted 3 of them along the edge of the plot of my country house. Before long, somebody dug up the cedars we'd planted in the wooded area. I wasn't too terribly upset by this. I figured that if someone dug them up, that meant people knew about their properties and would most likely plant them somewhere else and take good care of them. But one seedling still remained there. It had been planted near the brick wall of the garages located in front of the building. The soil there was so far from fertile. For the most part, it was construction refuge, covered over by a thin layer of fertile dirt. Nonetheless, the cedar took root and is still growing today. As far as its rate of growth and how smooth its trunk is, it's quite different from the cedars I planted at my country house, and it's about twice as tall. I got to thinking about why that would be, and I began to notice that when the people in the city come out onto their balconies, they often look at the cedar and sometimes they remark, "What a beautiful tree we have." And I too, when I walk or drive by, happily admire it. In this way, the cedar grown by the garages receives human attention and strives to be worthy of it. Now, especially since the Ringing Cedars of Russia series of books started coming out, there are companies who put out cedar products, including cedar oil. I also asked my daughter and her husband to set up cedar oil production. I told them about the ancient technique I learnt from Anastasia. Polina's husband, Sergei, made every possible effort to work in accord with both ancient techniques and today's requirements for producing food products. We arranged for the production to take place in a medications factory under the control of experienced specialists. The expression was carried out using the cold pressing method, which is supposed to preserve the greatest amount of the oil's beneficial substances, and using wooden blocks. It was necessary to do this because the cedar nut kernel and oil contain the entire periodic table, and certain elements can oxidize if they become in contact with metal. In addition, only glass containers were used during bottling. The oil we ended up with may also have been of better quality than if we'd produced it using the other methods, such as hot pressing. However, it differed from the cedar oil I tried in the Taiga. I got the impression that it contained less life force than the Taiga cedar oil. I won't go into detail about our extensive attempts to find the reason for the differences. I'll start by saying that we saw a change in quality as soon as we moved the whole production process, from nut storing up to the pressing of the oil in its packaging, to a village out in the Taiga, 120 kilometres outside the city. It turned out that you just can't produce a high quality oil in an urban setting, even in a medications factory. At every stage of production, the kernel and oil came into contact with the air. The big city air is very different from the air of the Taiga, which is full of phytoncides. As a result of moving production, the products of this small company, which was perhaps not very technically well equipped according to today's standards, were of higher quality than those produced by all other companies, not only in our country, I think, but in the world. I'm happy to have played even a small role in the appearance of this unique product, cedar oil. I think that this Taiga company is really the only one that produces actual cedar oil, because the others produce the oil of the cedar pine. A great many products in the world are marketed as ecologically pure, but I immediately ask myself where these products are from. Where were they grown? Can you really call any product ecologically pure at all if its raw materials are grown and produced in an area surrounded by highways or big and small cities? I don't think any product produced in areas like that can be ecologically pure, even if no toxic chemicals, pesticides or fertilizers are used to grow it. The cedar grows deep in the Siberian Taiga, hundreds and thousands of kilometers from large cities. There are no highways there, and you can only ship this unique product out by river. Of course, our civilization's filth can also end up there, but everything in the world is relative, and compared to giant cities, the air and water in the Taiga really are immeasurably cleaner, and no one is pouring any poisons into the ground. And so I think that there is no more pure, beneficial or healing product in the world than the cedar nut kernel and the products made from it. In telling about the Siberian Taiga, I've given special attention to the cedar, but in the Taiga region there are also many other food products that are of much higher quality than those we're already aware of. For example, cranberries, raspberries, cloudberries, currants and mushrooms. And to answer the question, what does Anastasia eat out there in the Taiga? I can tell you that she eats world-class, ecologically pure food of a type that you can't possibly buy, not even for $1 million. Back in my first book, I described how Anastasia lives out in the Taiga, and how astonished I was by her way of life. Now that so many years have passed since we first met, in thinking about her, I've come to the conclusion that the way people live in today's giant cities looks unnatural and absurd if you juxtapose it with Anastasia's life out in nature. At first glance, it seems extraordinary, the way the wild animals bring food to Anastasia when she gives them a certain signal. But even a hunting dog today will bring its prey to its master, and a falcon released to hunt also turns its prey over to its master. Goats and cows in a village farmyard are happy to feed their owners by giving them milk. The wild animals inhabiting the area around the glade where Anastasia lives mark their territory, and within this territory they consider a person something like a pack leader. I think that over the generations they were trained by Anastasia's forebears, and then they themselves trained their offspring. Anastasia actually eats very little. She never makes a fetish out of food. Many people have been asking recently about how Anastasia makes it through the severe Siberian winter, when the temperature reaches 35 to 40 degrees below zero, if she doesn't have any warm clothing or a heated dwelling. I'll start by saying that if the air temperature out in the open gets down to -30, it's always significantly warmer in the Taiga, and there can be up to a 10 degree difference in temperature. Anastasia has dugouts at various locations in the Taiga. The main one, where I myself have had occasion to pass the night more than once, consists of a spot hollowed out in the ground, about 2.5 meters long, 2 meters wide, and also about 2 meters high. The entrance to the dugout is narrow, about 60 centimeters wide and 1.5 meters high. The entrance is covered over with cedar branches. The walls and ceiling of the Taiga bedroom are woven of vines with bunches of dried grasses and Taiga flowers stuffed into them. The floor has been carpeted with dried hay. It's very comfortable sleeping in that kind of bedroom in the summer. No sounds penetrate it, to say nothing of all those radio and electric emissions that a person living in a multi-story building is subjected to. In late fall, Anastasia fills the entire area of her bedroom with dry hay and enters into an extended sleep similar to the state scientists call anabiosis. Anabiosis, as modern science explains it, is a state by which all of a living being's vital processes, including metabolism, slow down to such an extent that there are no visible signs of life. Scientists have been focusing on this unique biological phenomenon as they develop plans for extended space travel. What primarily attracts them is the fact that creatures in an anabiotic or hibernation state use much less oxygen and do not need food. It's been proven that their resistance to negative environmental factors increases. So, for example, it's been shown that infectious diseases don't develop in such animals, even when they are artificially infected, and that many poisons which would be fatal for their organism under normal circumstances are entirely harmless to them when they are hibernating or in an anabiotic state. It's even been proven that if you subject such animals to a fatal dose of ionizing radiation, they will still survive, since their metabolism has greatly decelerated, and that once they awaken, their vital functions resume entirely normally. But here's what's interesting. If a person, who is a thinking being, falls into a deep sleep in the winter, then what happens to his soul during this period? I haven't come across any hypotheses at all about this in scientific writings, but it is an extremely interesting question. One day I too had occasion to partially experience the unusual state of anabiosis for myself. This happened when I was in the Taiga in late fall, where Anastasia lives. The days at that time of the year are very short. When it began to get dark, Anastasia suggested I take a rest. I immediately agreed. The accumulated fatigue of city life and my taxing journey through the Taiga were already driving me towards sleep. This time the dugout was full of more hay than usual. Since I knew you don't get cold sleeping in hay even when it's below zero, I stripped down to my underwear and lay down, putting my jacket beneath my head. "It's already time for you to be waking up, Vladimir," Anastasia said, waking me. I felt her massaging my right hand, and I looked toward the entrance of the dugout. Its opening was barely visible. That meant the sun hadn't yet come up. "Why do I need to wake up? The dawn is just breaking." "It's the third dawn since you went to sleep that's breaking, Vladimir. Should you not wake up, your sleep might continue for several months and even years. Your soul, since it won't need to worry about keeping your body safe, will want to have a rest and wander around the other worlds in the universe. No one will be able to bring it back until it decides on its own that it wants to come back." "So that means it wasn't with me while I was sleeping?" It was with you, Spider. Vladimir, right alongside you. It was waiting for your sleep to become even more even and deeper, and then it would have been able to take its leave. But I decided to wake you. But why doesn't your soul leave when you fall into a deep sleep? My soul leave too, but it always comes back right on time. After all, I don't torment it. What do you mean? You mean I torment my soul? Vladimir, every person who falls prey to harmful habits and thought patterns, and who consumes harmful foods, brings torment first and foremost to his soul. What importance does food have for the soul? What does it also consume the food a person eats? The soul doesn't feed on material food, Vladimir, but it is able to see, hear, and actualize itself only through your body. If the body is unhealthy, if, for example, a person is drunk and his body is helpless, then the soul, as if it were bound, has no way of manifesting and actualizing itself. It can only feel, only weep over the helpless body that has been destroyed by the harmful drink. It can only attempt to warm damaged organ of the body, and it will expend a colossal amount of energy as it does so. When the soul's energy is exhausted, it becomes powerless and leaves the human body. The body dies. Yes, Anastasia, what you said about the soul is interesting, and it seems accurate, because there's a folk saying when a person dies, they say that he gave up his soul to God. What we get in your interpretation is the soul ran out of strength. I wonder, does my soul still have strength left? Since it came back, that means your soul still has strength, Vladimir. But please, try not to torment it. I will try, but wait. Doesn't a person's soul get a rest while he's sleeping? The soul is energy, Vladimir. A living, energetic complex. Energy doesn't need rest. But what do you think, Anastasia? Where does the soul go off to during sleep? It can go off to another dimension, to other dimensions, soar among the planets of the universe, and if the person wishes it to do so, it can gather information he needs. For example, if the person wants to learn something about the past or future, he can ask his soul as he falls asleep to visit the place and time that interests him, and the soul will fulfill his wish. But if the person sleeps an ordinary sleep that isn't sufficiently peaceful, and if the environment is not ideal, then the soul can't go off anywhere. It has to guard his body. From whom? From all manner of hostile influences. You sleep in your apartment, Vladimir, and its walls are filled to busting with electrical wires, and the wires give off radiation that adversely affects people. Sounds of the artificial world force their way in through the glass. The air in the apartment is not entirely healthy to breathe. Your soul cannot leave you alone. It has to be able to wake you in the case of a critical situation. I get it, Anastasia. This dugout I slept in is actually a great deal more comfortable than the most elegant bedrooms in today's hotels and apartments. It's like some kind of hyperbaric chamber. The air here is ideal, and there are no harmful rays and noise, and the temperature is stable. And so I sleep much better in it than I do in my apartment. I understand that, and have experienced it for myself. But I don't get why it is, when you fall asleep for a long time, that it doesn't bother your soul that your body is resting in a dugout where the entrance isn't even shut up. And if there's some danger, say there are some intruders, there won't be anybody to wake it up. Vladimir, any time anyone makes the slightest attempt to approach the glade we're in, no matter what their intentions, the entire space within a radius of 3 kilometers is put on guard. The animals, birds, and plants begin sounding the alarm. Those who are approaching will be gripped by terror, and if they succeed in overcoming it and aren't thrown off course, Then the space, that means the animals will wake the body and call the soul back by the means of the animals. What about in the winter, when everything's asleep? Not everything is asleep in the winter. Besides, in the winter it is easier for those who are awake to keep watch over what goes on. I don't understand everything Anastasia said about the soul during her winter sleep period, but I've had occasion to see for myself the way the wild animals and birds bring Anastasia troubling or happy news. Now that I'm familiar with the way Anastasia thinks of sleep, I can draw the following conclusion. Modern man and mankind as a whole don't have any opportunity to get enough good sleep, besides the fact that modern bedrooms can't measure up to the natural one. We have to add one more factor that's also of some importance. Modern man is continually caught up in a whirlwind of everyday worldly concerns, and he often keeps on thinking about them as he falls asleep. And if that's the case, then the question arises of how man is using the energy of his soul, which is capable of learning about other worlds when a person is sleeping and bringing him information about them when he wakes. Perhaps we need to construct our bedrooms so that no random sounds will penetrate it, and so there are no wires and telephones in it. It's possible for us to achieve this. It's more complicated to manage the necessary air quality. And so Anastasia, the hermit of the Siberian Taiga, has become the heroine of the Ringing Cedars of Russia series of books. She has borne me a son and a daughter. She now lives in the Taiga, in my heart, and in the image of the heroine of my books. I don't think I've been able to do this amazing woman's beauty, her intelligence, and her extraordinary capabilities justice in my descriptions. Really, it's probably not even possible to do this using ordinary language. Even now, I only sometimes see Anastasia as someone who is close to me, as a loved one. More often, I see her as unattainable and mysterious, as someone who possesses an inexplicable strength of spirit that she can use to create the future. Her characterization of our modern day reality in her story, or more precisely, the image she has created of the beautiful future of Russia and of the whole earth, have given birth to a beautiful phenomenon in society. Without waiting for decrees to be handed down from on high or for government financing, tens of thousands of people have independently set about turning this image created by Anastasia into actual reality. You can understand the main idea for building the future country by reading the books in order. But if I were to try to briefly, not in its entirety, present the idea that is helping those positive transformations take place, I could characterize it using the following words. Anastasia thinks that every family should have its own plot of land that's no less than 1 hectare in size. The family needs to transform this plot, which the Taiga hermit calls a family homestead, into a heavenly living oasis that can provide for all of man's material needs. The external appearance of the person's living creation and the way the Creator himself lives on it are indicators of the person's spiritual makeup. She considers it unacceptable to bury family members in a cemetery. They must be buried only on the family homesteads. Then the souls of relatives who have passed on won't suffer because their bodies seem to have been tossed into some deep hole in a cemetery, far away from their loved ones. People who are buried on the family homestead will, with their spirit, help and protect those living on it. Cemeteries analogous to our modern ones did exist back in antiquity too, but they were intended for animals that dropped dead from disease, criminals with no family, and warriors who died in a foreign land. Anastasia has told us how to set up our family homestead so that we can free ourselves from physical ailments with its help. She has talked in relatively great detail about the ancient and very lovely rite of marriage that help newlyweds, along with the power of their thought, create the design for their future family homestead, and about how, at the moment of marriage, with the participation of the parents, relatives, and friends, what they had conceived in thought would materialize in the space of several minutes. I think that this rite is one of the greatest discoveries of our millennium. After all, by using it, newlyweds, even today, can acquire a house, a garden, and a family homestead right during their wedding. Anastasia also asserts that for newlyweds who create their family homesteads in this way, love never fades, but actually grows stronger over the years, and she explains why this happens. When a husband looks at his wife, he subconsciously associates her with his glorious homestead too, and also with his child, who must also be born on the homestead. And one can believe in this. After all, the very best place on earth for each person is always his small motherland. His child will always be the most beautiful and best of all children. And Anastasia also asserts that if all people, or the majority of them, begin consciously creating their own family homesteads and turning them into heavenly oases, then the whole earth will be transformed. Natural disasters and wars will not occur on earth. Man's inner spiritual world will change, and new knowledge and capabilities will open up to him. Man will be able to create beautiful worlds resembling the earthly world on other planets. She considers today's technocratic method of exploring space and other planets a dead end, harmful for the planet Earth and the people living on it. The sensible way to explore the planets is through psycho-teleportation. But if people are to be able to do this, they first have to demonstrate their ability to develop the earth and express their spirituality in their way of life, not in words. Official critics might respond to the subjects of the books and to the Taiga hermit's statements in any of a number of ways, but their opinions aren't really so very important. The people, the most important critics, have already expressed their approval in tens of thousands of letters and hundreds of thousands of emails. They've expressed it not only in words, but in concrete actions too, and the hundreds of large and small settlements that have arisen and continue to arise throughout all of Russia are a confirmation of this. Now, here's where a riddle arises, one that's as yet insoluble and cryptic. If a mass movement has been set in motion solely by the statements of a Taiga hermit that have been introduced in books, then what kind of power lies behind her phrases? Perhaps they're constructed in such a way that the letters combine into some kind of code. Perhaps a certain rhythm of her phrases has significance. Anastasia usually tries to adopt the speaking mannerisms of those she's talking with, to use his lexicon and way of constructing phrases. But at certain moments, she'll suddenly begin speaking in some different kind of language that's emphatic and flowing and rhythmical. She pronounces each letter of the phrases she utters very precisely, and you clearly sense an extraordinary energy behind each sound. And then you remember what she said verbatim, as if there's some recorder at work in your brain. And that's not all. Living pictures appear before the listeners, and the subconscious grasps the meaning of what's been said. By way of example, I'll give you an excerpt from Anastasia's retelling of a conversation between God and the first man, from the book Cocreating. Where is the edge of the universe? What will I do when I come to it? When I have filled everything with myself? When I create that which I have thought? A man of the wellspring people asks God, and he receives his answer. My son, the universe is thought. A dream was born of the thought, and it is partially visible as matter. when you come to the edge of everything, a new beginning and continuation shall your thought discover. Out of nothing will arise the new, beautiful birth of you, and of the aspiration, reflecting in itself your soul and your dream. My son, you are endless, you are eternal, your creating dreams are within you. There are several theories regarding Anastasia's abilities. I'll share mine with you too. Anastasia's abilities, which seem extraordinary at first glance, were actually inherent in all or the majority of the Wellspring people. The effect of the Taiga hermit's statements have had on many people's actions is due not to some mystical force, but rather to people's very own ability to embrace them with their heart and soul. You get the impression that some memory has been preserved in modern day people's genes or in their subconscious, a memory of the way individual families and human society as a whole lived, starting back in the time of the Wellspring people, when man still understood how to communicate directly with God. This way of life, the Wellspring people's, is significantly more advanced than today's. Maybe it's from those times when people still knew what heaven was, but I don't think these people's actions were connected to any specific religion. All the homesteads that readers of the books are building turn out differently from each other. The houses they put up don't just differ in their external appearance. Some are two-storey wooden houses, while others are one-storey wattle and daub affairs, and the gardens, living fences and ponds are also constructed differently. It's common knowledge that religious ritual requires all its participants to strictly observe standardized ways of acting and speaking, but here we clearly see each individual's personal creativity in the way they realize this beautiful idea. If people are thankful to Anastasia for anything, it's probably for the fact that she has awakened within their souls the aspirations of a human creator. Beautiful. Book 10, The Little Taiga Dweller. More than 15 years have passed since I met Anastasia, the hermit of the Siberian taiga. And when I learned that she was going to bear my son, I took great pains to move Anastasia to the city of Novosibirsk, even going so far as to try to intervene physically. Back then it seemed unacceptable for her to give birth in the taiga, and impossible to raise a child outside social institutions. At first, Anastasia's way of life in the taiga seemed strange to me, to put it mildly. But now, the way people live in today's giant cities seems even stranger. And when she was pregnant with our daughter and stayed in the taiga, as she'd done before with our son, my soul was joyous and calm. My views of life had changed radically in the course of 10 years. Had Anastasia wanted to give birth somewhere other than the taiga, even if she'd been in the best maternity ward in the capital, I'd have fallen into depression and despair, and I'd probably have worried constantly about our child's future if he'd ended up being raised and educated within today's societal institutions. I'd rethought my priorities, and my views of life had changed. Anastasia gave birth to our daughter in her family glade in the Siberian taiga. I wasn't present for the birth, and there were no qualified doctors at her side, no modern medical equipment, but in my soul I was calm. I knew that she was giving birth in one of the most perfect maternity wards on earth, in her family space. And when Anastasia gave birth to our daughter, she asked what I would like to name the newborn. Without thinking, I answered Anastasia. And it wasn't because Anastasia had named our son Vladimir. It's just that by the time our daughter was born, I'd come to see Anastasia as a wise, brave, and very kind woman. Her name had become synonymous for me with these qualities, and I wanted our daughter to inherit them. I couldn't imagine anyone other than Anastasia raising our daughter, even though at many points her approach to child rearing looks like a total lack of conscious approach to child rearing. That's far from the case. For example, here's what happened one day with our little daughter in the taiga. This time when Anastasia met me, she was in a jolly mood, even playful, it seemed to me. She appeared suddenly when I was approaching the familiar glade, where the three of them were now living, wearing a light dress reminiscent of a Roman tunic. She stood on my path and smiled. I wondered where she'd gotten that dress. I stopped, delighting in the unusual vision. It's really something, I thought. So much time has passed, and she's given birth to 2 children, but she looks just as young and extraordinarily beautiful as before. Look at me, I've grown old and grey, but she doesn't age a bit. I recalled how, waking up early in the morning, she'd take joy in the coming day and set off racing against the she-wolf, performing elaborate somersaults. Would she be able to do that now? As if she'd heard my silent question, Anastasia performed a double somersault with almost no running start at all, and then there she was again right next to me. Her voice rang out, "Hello, Vladimir." I wasn't able to answer right away. A captivating aroma and extraordinary warmth radiated from Anastasia's body. I shyly touched her on the shoulder. For some reason I hesitated to embrace her, and I responded lamely, "And hello to you, Anastasia." She snuggled up against me, hugged me, and whispered, "Our darling little daughter is such a smart and beautiful little thing." Then Anastasia walked ahead of me barefoot through the grass. She stepped, putting one foot in front of the other, the way a model does on a runway. This wasn't the first time she'd done this, but every time she does it, her gait looks hilarious and it raises my spirits. As we usually did, we headed straight to the lake to bathe after my trip. I already knew the purpose of this swim wasn't just so I could freshen up after travelling. The main point of it was to wash away all the smells that weren't native to this Taiga glade. To do this, once I'd taken my first dip, Anastasia helped me give myself a brisk rub down with a paste she'd made of various herbs. Rubbing me all over, she joked, You're having less and less good food and your tummy is a little distended." "It's dysbacteriosis, that's what the doctors say. Practically 90% of the population has it," I replied. Anastasia laughed. "Or maybe the whole problem is that the tummies don't have enough willpower. You yourself say that 10% of the population doesn't have this dysbacteriosis." I had to walk around for a while with my body and even my hair coated with this green paste, and then dive back into the water and splash myself with it. After I came out of the water and my body had dried off a bit, Anastasia removed her tunic-like dress and held it out to me. "It would be good for you to put this shirt on now." Anastasia stood before me, her breasts exposed. They were a bit larger than they'd been before. A tiny drop of milk appeared on one nipple. "You're still nursing our daughter?" I asked. "I'm supplementing with milk," Anastasia answered brightly. She squeezed her breast with both hands and splashed me in the face with a stream of milk, then laughed and wiped the milk over my face. "If you put this on and belt it, it will look like a shirt on you. I've been wearing this shirt continually since I gave birth to our daughter. Sometimes she would sleep wrapped in it. She's grown accustomed to its smell and to the way it looks. If you do what I tell you to do, it will be easy for our little girl to get used to you." "But what will you wear now?" "Well, I have 2 very similar ones, and I've alternated wearing them. The one I'm offering you, the one I wore more often, and I'd often fasten my hair with a little braid made of grass. Now I'll go do one like it for you too, and meanwhile you can go observe our little girl a bit." "Just observe her a bit? You mean I'm not allowed to touch her or have contact with her?" "Of course you're allowed, Vladimir. Even so, it's better just to observe her at first. Even though she's little, she's already an independent being. So it's better if you just observe her first, without pestering her. You can acquaint yourself with her habits and try to get a sense of her world. I know that when our son was born, I just observed him at first too. Tell me, Anastasia, how long before I can pick her up?" "You will feel when the time is right. Your heart will let you know." It seemed to me that Anastasia wanted me to observe our little daughter on my own and try to figure something out. And that's why she's come up with some urgent tasks of her own. And I wasn't against this way of doing things either. I really did need to find some way to study how our child behaves, because to my daughter, I was just some uncle she didn't know. And then this strange uncle suddenly goes and picks the child up for no reason at all and starts with his sloppy sentimentality, squeezing her and cooing to her to make himself feel happy. But maybe the child hates being cooed at, not just by strange uncles, but in general, no matter who's doing it. I asked, Anastasia, so where is our daughter now? If you go off to do your braiding, to braid the tie, how will I find her? She's somewhere around here, not far away, Anastasia told me calmly. Try to find her yourself. Let your heart tell you where she's to be found. It seemed to me that I'd begun to understand a lot about life in the Taiga glade, but each time something new would still amaze me. How can you allow a child who hasn't even turned 2 yet to walk or crawl wherever she wants through the Taiga, and not even keep an eye on her while she does? And this is the Taiga, where there are no people, in the Taiga where there are a great many wild animals. In the past, I'd observed my newborn son, and I'd seen him fall asleep against the she-bear's belly, while the she-bear lay motionless, waiting for him to get a good sleep. I saw how the wolves would guard the infant, and how the nimble squirrels would play with him. It was clear to me that the beasts living here in the glade or nearby it were like pets. Within the territories they'd marked, they didn't fight and didn't attack each other. A dog that lives in the same household with a cat might not touch the cat, or might even become friends with it, but he might still attack a cat from outside the family. So it makes sense that here, too, the animals don't attack each other within their defined territory, and they certainly won't attack the human's offspring. They revere the human living on their territory, so naturally they'll protect the human child and consider it an honour to look after him. All the same, this kind of situation was a little unfamiliar. For example, what might happen if the child were to go outside the marked territory? Other wild animals wouldn't treat him the way his own do. Basically, in spite of the logic of it all, some unfamiliar feelings arose in me. But what if I come across some wild animal while I'm looking for our daughter? I asked Anastasia as she was walking off. I'm still not used to them, and they're not used to me either. They won't do anything bad to you, Vladimir. You're wearing the shirt, after all. You can walk around with complete confidence and not torment yourself with fearful thoughts. Anastasia ran off to her little earthen home. After I came out into the glade and didn't find anyone there, I set off through the forest surrounding the great glade. Since I figured our daughter might be close by, I decided that if I walked in circles, gradually increasing the diameter, then I'd be sure to catch sight of her. And I saw her before I'd even completed my first loop. Little Anastasia was standing alone between some currant bushes. She was holding on to one of the branches and examining some bug and smiling. I hid behind another bush and began observing her. The little girl was dressed in a short, shirt-like dress, her hair bound with a tie woven from the strands of some kind of grass. Once she'd satisfied her curiosity about what was going on the branch, she set off barefoot across the grass in the direction of the glade. Then her foot must have caught a branch or in the grass, and she fell down. The little girl fell flat on her face on the grass, but she didn't cry. Without a word, she braced her little hands against the ground and sat up. Then she crawled a metre or two on hands and knees, and then got to her feet once more, and stepping slowly, continued along her path. Trying to remain unnoticed, I followed my daughter very cautiously, and suddenly, right before my very eyes, Nastenka disappeared. At first, shocked, I just stopped and stood stock still for a bit. Then I quickly ran up to the spot where she'd just been walking and began looking all around, but she was nowhere to be seen. Not behind the tree near where she'd disappeared, and not behind the bush. The little girl couldn't yet run fast enough to disappear from sight so swiftly. I began circling around the tree near where she'd disappeared, increasing the diameter of the circle with each round, but I still couldn't see her. I stood for some time trying to decide what to do. Then I ran to the little earthen house where I figured Anastasia would be. She was sitting calmly out at the entrance, braiding a headband out of grass strands and quietly singing. Not far away, a silver fox was rubbing herself against the tree trunk like an affectionate cat. "Anastasia, our daughter's disappeared," I blurted out. I was walking a few metres behind her and not taking my eyes off her. Then suddenly she up and it was like she dissolved into thin air. She's nowhere to be found. Anastasia reacted with surprising calm. She didn't even stop her braiding as she answered, "Don't worry, Vladimir. I think she's probably in the old fox's den now." "Who told you that?" "Do you see the lazy way the fox is rubbing against the tree?" "Yes, I see. That's her way of letting me know the child is in her den." "But maybe she's trying to tell you something else." "If she was telling me about something bad, then she'd be showing her agitation. She'd run off a bit, then come running back and try to get me to follow her to help. All the same, you can't be 100% certain where our daughter is, especially since there's no den at all in the spot where she disappeared. I looked around everywhere." "All right, Vladimir, then let's go and have a look together and see where our clever little one is hidden." When we arrived at the spot where the little girl had seemed to dissolve, Anastasia pushed aside some grass, and I immediately glimpsed the den. Its entrance was partially collapsed, and a little hole had formed. I glanced inside it and saw Nastenka sleeping peacefully, curled up at the bottom. "There, you see, she's fallen asleep on the damp ground, and I don't think she'll be able to get out of there on her own. The grass on the bottom is dry, Vladimir, and when our little daughter wakes up, she'll be able to solve the problem of how to get out of her shelter all on her own. How will she figure that out? If you want, Vladimir, you just watch, and I'll head back and finish what I was working on." I stayed put. After about 30 minutes, I heard a rustling sound in the hole. The little girl had awakened, but she was having a hard time scrambling out of the hollow on her own. But she wasn't actually even trying very hard to do so. After making her first attempt and testing her own powers, she let out a sound, summoning someone. "Yahoo! Hey!" Not a cry, but an actual summons. And right away, the vixen that had been hanging around Anastasia earlier appeared. First, she stood at the edge of her former den. She looked in, sniffed, and then, turning her back to the den, lowered her tail into it. The vixen tensed her muscles and slowly pulled the little child, who'd grabbed onto her tail, out of the den. The little girl trailed along behind the fox for about half a metre. After that, she let go of the tail, got up onto her hands and knees, and then stood up on her own 2 feet. Little Nastenka took a look around, smiled as if recalling something, and then, stepping slowly, she set off, smiling, in the direction of the lake. I continued to follow her unnoticed. There were no wild animals around, and it seemed that no one in the Taiga besides me was watching the little one. But a bit later on, I realised I was wrong about that. It turned out that she and I were both being watched closely, and before long, I, for the first time, saw a conflict between my daughter and a wild animal in the Taiga. When Nastenka had made her way out from amongst the raspberry bushes, she stood where she was for some time and gazed at the mirror-like surface of the lake. Then she took off her short little shirt and stepped carefully with her bare feet, headed toward the lake. She was about 5 or 6 metres from the water when a tough-looking she-wolf suddenly sprang out of the bushes and, with several powerful leaps, put herself between the shore of the lake and Nastenka. The little girl slapped the beast on the back with her tiny hands, tugged at its fur and touched its snout. By way of reply, the she-wolf licked the child's foot, but that's where the mutual signs of attention or affection ended. Playing with the she-wolf evidently didn't enter into Nastenka's plans. She wanted to get to the water, which she first tried to do by taking 3 steps to the side and walking around the she-wolf that was standing at that spot. But as soon as the little girl tried to move ahead, the she-wolf once again blocked her path. Nastenka pushed against the beast's side with her hands, attempting to move the obstacle, but the she-wolf didn't obey the child and stood there, as if rooted to the spot. Then Nastenka sat down on the grass, thought a bit, and made an attempt to crawl under the she-wolf's belly. But this attempt did not meet with success either. The she-wolf pressed herself to the ground. Evidently, Nastenka understood that the beast was not letting her get to the water, and that she could not remove the obstacle using force. She sat on the grass for some time, pondering something, then started to crawl and even move away from the she-wolf and the lake. Before long, she stood up, a small twig in her hands. She walked up to the she-wolf's snout, ran the twig along it, and threw it in the direction of the forest. The twig only flew about 1.5 meters. The she-wolf jumped for the twig and grabbed it with her teeth. As this was going on, Nastenka set off running toward the shore of the lake, her legs pumping away. The she-wolf understood she'd been outsmarted, and with 2 headlong jumps, she caught up to the child at the water's edge and knocked her off her feet. Nastenka fell onto her back and her head touched the water. Pushing against the sand with her little legs, she tried to push herself further out into the lake. The she-wolf grabbed the girl's foot with her teeth. She was probably trying not to cause the child any pain. Her grip was light. Nastenka pushed her second leg into the she-wolf's nose, pulled the sole of her foot from the she-wolf's maw, and in high spirits crawled off into the water. The shore in that spot dropped off sharply to the depth of almost 1 meter, and the little tot was submerged in the water up to her head. But right when she dove out, working her little arms and legs, she kept herself on the surface of the water. I didn't think our daughter could swim well. I ran out of my hiding place, intending to jump into the water, but when I got to the shore, I saw the she-wolf swimming up to the child. Splashing about in the water, the little girl nestled against the wolf's side and took hold of the fur with their little hands, and they swam along the shore in the shallows. Nastenka let go of the she-wolf as soon as she felt the lake bed beneath her feet. The wet she-wolf came onto the shore and shook herself, the splashing spray glinting in the sun. She didn't run away, but remained on the shore, attentively watching the child out of the corner of her eye, and also, as it seemed to me, warily glancing at me. And Nastenka, standing in the water up to her waist, smiled and eagerly kept calling the she-wolf to come over to her. She'd slap her little hands on the water and beckon her with a wave, but the she-wolf didn't go to her. It's possible that the beast didn't like this watery business, or that the games in the lake seemed dangerous. Nastenka suddenly turned her little head in my direction and froze. For the first time I felt my little daughter's gaze fixed on me, and I stood there beneath her gaze, powerless to move a muscle. I understood that she perceived me as some kind of baffling creature that had suddenly appeared in the territory she inhabited. She looked me over for some time, then turned away and came out of the water on the shore, taking her time, and walked up to the she-wolf lying on the grass. The she-wolf picked up the little dress in her teeth and gave it to the little girl. But Nastenka didn't want to put it on her damp body. She took the clothing and set off in the direction of the dugout at the edge of the glade. I continued observing her path through the Taiga and thinking, a tiny child is walking, smiling through a glade deep in the Siberian Taiga, and nothing frightens her. No one attacks her. On the contrary, the wild animals are prepared to rush to her aid at a moment's notice. A tiny person is walking along the way a royal hare walks through her kingdom. It's interesting for her to observe how the bugs and squirrels and birds live, to examine the flowers and test the blades of grass and berries to see how they taste. But at this same time, some other little girl of the very same age finds herself in a space bounded by 4 walls, and within it she's confined within 4 little playpen walls, like some kind of little wild animal. And it doesn't matter that the walls are pretty, and her kind parents buy up all sorts of plastic toys for her, and she tests them to see how they taste. Millions of little girls and boys in our world grow up in apartment cages like little wild animals. And then we want them to grow up into intelligent, free and noble people. Well, these individuals can't even imagine. Freedom first of all means free thought, knowledge and perception of the living universe. A child will be told about his living universe in school when he grows up a bit. Of course he'll receive certain information about the great world of living nature, about the universe created by the great creator, but he'll never be able to perceive it through his own experience. You can't replace the perceptions a person can receive in the first years of his life while living in harmony with the great world of the creator. Not through exerting effort or straining himself, but conversely through playing. There are no school lessons or university lectures at all that can replace this. I'm not encouraging anyone to head out to the Taiga with children. That would be idiotic. Even so, we have to do something. End of that chapter.